Basketball.
Every ball.
I'm sleeping.
Oh, that's bad.
Okay,
Yeah, it is.
this is a great place because we're just starting chapter 7. And in it, you know, I told you I leave the NIV. Oh, I need to put NIV in there. That's the NIV. So the NIV, after this, Jesus went around in Galilee. Oh, I should recap slightly. In our previous lessons, previous sessions, I gave you the synopsis for the outline for chapter 6. And we saw how complicated is not the right word. It's a very simple arguments. Intricate, very good word, intricate the argument is, and you can see it when it's laid out. When you just read it, you go, you just read it. But when you see it laid out, you go, whoa, this is interesting. And you notice that the end of that, the unstated telos, the unstated conclusion of that last of the 6th chapter is that Jesus did not go to the Passover. And we concluded, I think quite rightly, he didn't go to the Passover because there was a Passover. But if you remember before, and we're going to see it repeated, they wanted to make Jesus the king. They kind of didn't talk about priestness, but they talked about sacrifice. But he can't be the king and he can't be the priest or sacrifice because he has not been anointed. We're going to see that repeated here, which is very interesting. So in this one, Jesus goes to the Festival of Tabernacles. That's the Festival of Booths. We'll talk about that a little bit. Like I said, after this, Jesus went around in Galilee. He did not want to go about in Judea because the Jewish leaders there were looking for a way to kill him. And here's the Greek. Remember where they, wake up. All right, there's the Greek. There's their stuff. Here's King James. After these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, for he would not walk in Jewry, because the Jews sought to kill him. And that's not exactly correct. But here's what this is a transliteration of the Greek, because always. And after meta pautades peripate, he was treading all around. So that's the thing. That's why I like the NIV, or the King James. King James does have it in a little bit closer verbiage than the NIV, but the NIV is a different type of translation.
Strange.
Well, you notice what I translate, and I'll remind you how I translate that. The Jews, Jesus to Galilee, no or not, assigning a reason, he did will or desire in Judea, and this they translate it Jewry. Now, why do they do that? Okay. Again, the word Eodin specifically means Judeans. Even the NIV, let's see what the NIV said back there. Even the NIV likes to say, they correctly, in my opinion, say Judea, but it's not the Jewish leaders. In the Greek, it says, it very specifically says Eodin. And I tell you that I translate this, the Greek translation is Judeans, literally belonging to Judea. Now, why do they translate it like, for example, the Jews, or the NIV says Jewish leaders? Well, I'm not sure our translators are giving us the best account, but you can see, I give you the direct Greek and the translation. And like I said, when I see Judea, that's Judea. So I always say Judea. When I see Judeoi, that's Judeans. You know, it changes slightly because depending on the case. In this case, it's, I believe, a nominative case. But anyway, the case of the verb makes a difference, but it doesn't change the word. So I always translate it not Jews, but as Judeans. And it's not the Jewish leaders, okay, although that's what the NIV gave us. What's the NIV doing? What are they trying to do for you?
Looking at other sources and bringing the conclusion from other things.
Well, I wouldn't say other sources. They're trying to they're trying to connect the dots is a nice way of saying it. Persuade, I think, is more like unto it. Although I think that they believe very sincerely they are trying to connect the dots, right? But I don't want them to connect the dots for me. I want to be able to be not persuaded by their arguments, but rather persuaded by what does it say. And the impression the Greek gives us is it's not just the Jewish leaders. You can't blame the Jewish leaders, right, for causing Jesus's issues. And we're going to see even more of this as we go along in John. It's not just John, though, in all the Gospels. It's not the Jewish leaders. It's the Judeans. And you say, well, those are Jewish people. Yeah, no, maybe so. The word in Greek is always the Judeans, belonging to Judea. In other words, the people belong to Judea. Yes, sir.
Are you considered a Judean if you live in Judea, or do you have to be from there?
Oh, see, now you're lifting the can of worms. And, if you're a Samaritan okay. I want to go too far down this thing, but, in the ancient world, let's talk about the ancient world. If you are, let's say you're a Judean moving into Samaria, you think you're going to have issues? Yeah. Let's say you're a Samaritan moving into Judea. You think you're going to be a problem? What do you think the Judeans, well, we know what the Judeans did. It's in Jeremiah, it's in Ezekiel. What did they do when they went back from Babylon into Judea? What did they do with the Samaritans? Kicked them to the curb, kicked them out, said, hey, we don't want you around here. That's what you did in the ancient world, okay? You went in, you took over, you kept moving your boundary stones, right? Kept moving the boundary stones, kept moving the fence lines until your neighbor is like, what kind of justice is he going to get? Who's given the justice in Judea right now? The Romans. The Romans control it. Remember, okay, so before, under the Seleucid Empire, the Levant, under the Seleucid Empire, which was a Greek empire, was controlled by the Greeks. And did the Greeks have police? The Greek police? No, there's no Greek police. Jewish police. Is it Jewish police? No. Then they invited the Romans in to help them, right, against the Greeks, the Seleucid Empire. So the Romans go, we'll come help. Yeah, we like it when people ask us to come in because we bring our legions. Now, what are legions? Are they policemen? Yeah, the warriors. They're military. What's the military do? Kill people, destroy things. Yeah, take over. That's the purpose of the military. That's why you don't want the military policing things. Military police is almost anachronism. No, military police the military. They don't police the outside of the military. They police the military to make sure they follow the laws of war. And by the way, the Romans did have military kind of ish police, but we don't, the questionaries, the torturers, whatever. So if you broke their laws, they'd be after you. That's not a good thing. But anyway, my point here is this. What you did when you took over a land is all those that believe differently from you, unless there was some control mechanism, right? The other people disappeared. They left. They were forced out. That's why the Samaritans were all over, right? Until the Judeans came back, the Jewish people came back from Babylon. And then when they came back, they kicked the Samaritans out. And there are the schools of Judaism. And we know in the Galilean area, the Galil has, basically Herod. Herod is an Edomite, and his children are Edomites. But during the Hasmonean dynasty, this is all history, okay? At the very beginning of the class, remember a year ago or so, I gave this whole history because I always do the history. It's important to note this history. But Herod was not in the line of kings at all. The Maccabees were not in the line of kings at all. The Maccabees were probably Levites, but not Aaronite priests, and they were the ones who caused the Maccabean Hasmonean dynasty's revolution against the Greeks. And they were pretty successful at it. You know, that's where Hanukkah comes from. That's where other things come from. And they were relatively successful. However, they had to ask the Romans in to help them. When the Romans came in, the Romans originally let them keep 4 tetrarchies. Actually, they let them keep a whole thing under Herod the Great. Herod the Great controlled it all. When Herod the Great died, and Herod the Great ruled by force, and it's a very effective technique, by the way. The Chinese communists and the Soviets did really well until the Soviets got wimpy. And then they started, you know, that's when Glasnost was called their end. Freedom of speech and expression and communication and lessening the regulations and lessening the KGB basically ended the end of the Soviets. And the Chinese saw that. So guess what the Chinese do? Tighten down, because they realize that if you keep force, force is great, doesn't cause revolution, right? The opposite. Historically, just read your history. They don't teach that, do they? They teach that what? What do they teach? They teach that as people get more and more upset, they do what? They revolt. No, the exact opposite is true. Just before the American Revolution, we had the greatest freedom in America. We did. What did we revolt against? Taxation. And basically what was happening is the Brits were beginning to see those Americans are getting too much freedom. We're going to put the thumb on them. And when they started, what happens is people, if you keep the thumb on people, there's no revolution. But the minute they start releasing the pressure on it's like a pressure cooker, right? As long as you keep it closed, you're making dinner. Pop it, it'll explode, or it lets all the steam off, right? And that's what happens. In the French Revolution, just before the French Revolution, the French had the highest standard of living, the most food, probably the wealthiest merchant class in the world. And what happened? The French king said, I need to put a little clamp down. And his little clamp down basically started the French Revolution. So, yeah, it's really interesting. So Herod the Great kept power by force and terror. When he died, his sons, there were 4 of them, could not keep it. Actually, there were 3 of them. And the Romans had been asked in to help. And the Romans said, hey, we'll help. So they set up the, I can't remember all the names. It's in my notes, but they set up the provinces, and they set up a tetrarchy. And they basically gave power to the sons of Herod to begin with. And one of his sons was toast. They almost immediately, he was like, I think, croaked. And so they put Pilate, or they put not Pilate originally, but they put a legatus. A legatus is in charge of a legion. So basically the guy running the legion was placed in charge of Judea. That's one of the first. But you also had the other tetrarchies. And Herod's son was in control of Herod, the one in the Bible, in the New Testament Gospels, was the head of the Galil. And in the Galil, it was supposed to be Judeans, but Herod was an Edomite. He was not supposed to be in the temple, but he claimed to be the head of the Jews, the king of the Jews, even though he had no lineage in it. And also, and this goes back to the thing, the Maccabees claimed to be priests and high priests and king. And so if you're high priest and king, you're the Messiah. And so they had multiples, I think 7. There were 7 brothers. Each of them was high priest and king. They got croaked pretty quick by all kinds of stuff bad happening. But the Maccabees had controlled the high priesthood. And so the problem with the high priesthood, though, we know from the Hasmonean, that period, they were becoming Hellenized. And so that was a problem. The Sadducees were becoming Hellenized. That caused a real problem between the Sadducees and the Pharisees, which we've talked about a lot. Right now we have the Judeans in Judea, who are mostly Jewish. almost always, almost completely, under the control of the Romans. In the Galil, we have Jewish people, Judeans, Jewish people who are the Galil, who are in control by Herod. Then we have the other areas. We have the Greek areas, the Decapolis. We have the southern areas. The northern areas are mostly controlled by the Russians, by the Romans. Not the same thing, right? Not quite. Romans are smarter, all the Greeks. Anyway, than the Soviets. Any case, we have a very interesting, not so explosive because it's under control of the Romans. And by the way, the Romans eventually took over the whole thing. Why? They didn't trust Herod's kids, and almost all of them got sent to Gaul, or, the good old way you take care of the issue, the problem of princes, according to Machiavelli. But the big deal here is we have a relatively cohesive, non-diverse. You did not allow diversity because what does diversity do in a nation state? Divides and dilutes. Yeah, you can't have, especially since all these are religious type nation states. And they realize that. Matter of fact, the best way to destroy a state? Diversify significantly, yes. So that's one of the techniques that's used by conquerors, and it's used very effectively in the Middle East, especially in this time. Anyway, so, and by the way, the Romans played this game a lot. But this is what we got. It says, going to Judea, apokathente, to kill him outright, which is pretty close to our translation. And here's the translation. And after these, Jesus was treading all around into Galilee, assigning a reason he did not desire into Judea to tread all around because the Judeans were plotting to kill him outright, which is interesting. So we can gather a little bit of historical data just from this. What does this mean? What does this mean happened when the 5,000 went home? Where did they come from? Do you remember? They mostly followed Jesus when he went from Jerusalem back up to the Galil, to Galilee. That's where they were coming from. The 5,000 that he fed, 10,000 people, maybe 5,000 men, right? They had followed him from Jerusalem, from Judea. So what happened when many of his disciples, and not all of them, but many of his disciples left him, right? Where'd they go? Back home. And when they went back home, what was their report? Probably pretty good. Good. When I say good, I don't mean positive to Jesus. They probably reported exactly what he said to him. What did they say to him? I am the bread of life. I am basically God. Remember the four things that really bothered Judeans? I am the sacrifice of God. I am the Passover. Okay. These things, when in the Jewish Judean area, would really upset them, right?
Basically, what they understood, it was heresy he was professing.
It's a heresy. Yeah, it's a heresy to them. And the other thing is, we said it's impossible, we don't know, but an unstated telos is Jesus did not go on the Passover. Do you realize what the problem with that is, right? The pilgrim feast you're required to go to. Jesus basically declared, not so many words, this is what the unstated telos is, and we got it, that he had pronounced that he was the Passover. He was the sacrifice. Now, it hasn't been consummated yet, but this is the message John wants us to know. John did not want to come out and say, though, that Jesus missed the Passover. Why? It's way too inflammatory. Right on. It's one of the 36. And I don't have the list of 36, but if you go look at the Jewish handbook, I have a copy. It's this thick. The Jewish handbook basically tells you historically about, and it's from the Judean Society, the American Judean Society. They wrote the Jewish handbook. It's a handbook that if you're a Jewish person, this is what you are supposed to believe. And it gives historical sources, information. It is not biased toward Orthodox, Reform, or to the other group, whatever that other group is. It is just kind of general information for a Jewish person to know what you are supposed to believe. As
Jewish catechism?
it really is. It's a Jewish catechism put together. You know why they put together, right? The American Jewish Society put together. Why? What is it about? Okay.
They're a minority in this country, so they're hearing all this stuff around them, so.
That is precisely one of the reasons. The other reason is they're minority. Many of them, okay, you have the three groups. You have the Reform, you have the Orthodox, and you have the other group, whatever. There's three groups. There's a middle group. There's Orthodox, which is considered super conservative, conservative Jewish, and the Reformed Jewish group is considered super liberal. Okay, the thing is that how do I bring this group together? I tell them what they're supposed to know and believe. The catechism, right? Here's your catechism. You don't bias it, but you say, here's what Jewish people believe. Part of the problem is the Jewishness in America has become very social and not as much cultural as a religion. And if you talk to a lot of Jewish people in this country, they'll tell you it's not about religion, it's about our culture and society. And by the way, that is a problem for Israel too. Israel has that serious problem because a lot of their society has become steeped in
Well, they're ethnic. It's an
Ethnically.
group, so.
yes, and they consider themselves a
Non-sectarian?
sectarian. Yeah,
It's like cultural identity rather
a
than
culture. Yes, precisely. That's why the American Jewish Society put together the Jewish Handbook, is to teach or tell Jews, not just American Jews, but all English-speaking Jews, basically this is what we believe as a culture and society. Very important. Now, it's like Catholics in the Catechism. Okay, 90% of Catholics don't understand even what Vatican II is. Okay, or Vatican I. Most of them are living by Vatican I, which is really funny because we've been in Vatican II for 40 years now, since what's his name, John Paul. So anyway, Vatican II happened, and Catholicism is, how close it is to Lutheranism? Like, yeah, close. There's like three major items: the authority of the Pope, the communion, and there's one more.
Mary.
No, not really. Well, ish. I'll give you ish. The thing is that Vatican II said that we do not venerate.
Okay, by works. They
No, they don't. Not at all. Not Vatican II is basically there's no work salvation in Catholicism by Vatican II. In Vatican I, you could have said, they're touching the fringe, but Vatican II, complete immaculate conception, the transubstantiation, and the authority of the Pope. That's the only thing separating us from Catholicism at this moment, right now, since Vatican II. So, period, dot. And, we're going to talk about Immaculate Conception. We'll get there really quick. But anyway, these are cultural ideas and identities are very interesting, even in religious structures. And by the way, if Lutherans don't think they got some, you're fooling yourself. You need to look and see, like I said, let's put on our Greek blinders because then we understand Greek, right? But when you take off your blinders, it's like, it's good to understand yourself and others, right? Yes, sir.
Most people misunderstand the Immaculate Conception. They make it equivalent to the virgin birth, but that's not what it is. It was the theory that Mary was born of a virgin.
Sinless. Well,
Yeah.
not born of a virgin, but born without any sin. Therefore, and by the way, this goes back to the idea of original sin. And I'm not going to get into that because remember look, in this class, I don't care theology. We don't talk theology. We'll talk historical theology. So bring it up. That's okay. But it's not about theology. What is it about? It's about knowledge, right? So ideas, historical ideas. So you're right on the money. So, the Jewish people believe that there is an the age of when you're responsible, the age of responsibility, just like the Baptists believe, the Armenians believe this too. The Armenians' belief is that when you have no responsibility as a child, but at some point in time, and the Armenians don't say when. The Jewish people say big time when. It's when a girl is 12 and has pubic hair, and a boy is 13 with pubic hair. That is when, because, and how they get that. Back in the Genesis, what did God do? We know what God, it says, what did the Jews believe God did when he cast them out of Eden? He put pubic hair on them. It says in the Bible that he made a sacrifice and clothed them with it. That is our euphemistic treatment of it. If you actually look at the Hebrew, it says that he gave them hair. So basically, the Hebrew rabbis, go talk to your rabbi, go look at the Jewish book of, the Jewish handbook, and it will tell you that the Jewish people, that's why they set the age of accountability for girls at 12 and pubic hair, and boys at 13 with pubic hair. They see that is the indication from Genesis that you have become an adult and now responsible for your sins. Adam and Eve did not, according to the Jewish rabbis, have pubic hair, which indicated their state of innocence. I'm just telling you history. Immaculate Conception says that Mary that is a Catholic idea, and also comes right out of original sin. If you believe in original sin and you believe that as a theory, you better start digging your theology out, because when you start reading the theology, that based in theology and philosophy, the Catholics came to the conclusion that Mary must have been born without any sin. That's the Immaculate Conception. That is correct. Not Christ. Christ was born of a virgin who was immaculately conceived without sin. And if you go down the track of original sin, that's kind of where you are. And that's why Martin Luther doesn't talk very much about it, because this is a serious theological and philosophical issue that you better start studying your philosophy and theology if you want to get into it. Because guess what? You're going to lose every time. Why are you going to lose? Because you got to have, you end up with Immaculate Conception. You have to have it. So I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm just telling you what the Jewish people believe. I'm telling you what the Lutherans believe. And I'm telling you what the Catholics believe. And so it all is historical basis, right? And where does it come from? Well, it doesn't come from the Bible, as we will find very quickly. But when the Jewish Festival of Tabernacles was near, okay, this is it, the booths. Now the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles at hand. And I should have that in bold, that's the identity. But Aegian is near the Horta, the festival con of the Judean, the land of Judea, the skinopegia, to make fast a tent. Skinopegia, to make fast a tent. It's one of those cool words in Greek. And by the way, it's called the Feast of Tabernacles. That's a translation. It's really the Feast of Booths. That's what the Jewish people call it. But it was near the festival of the Judeans to make fast a tent. Booths. All right. Yeah, they're kind of lighter color. Isn't that funny? John alludes to Jews' Feast of Tabernacles and the great day of the feast in John 7, 2 and 37. He immediately tapped into the body of cultural, social, religious images and knowledge of the hearts and minds of the audience from the first century, who would have been familiar with contemporary Jewish practice. However, youth and young adults in the 21st century are less likely to have sufficient understanding of this feast. By making a context of the Feast of Tabernacles explicit, you can help whatever. This is the information. This is all from Jewish source. I like using Jewish source for this information. Okay, well, I think they're going to tell us about it. All right, Lord's deliberate design to dramatize great truths relative to himself. Okay, remember, this is from a specific source. So religious social practice and prevailing, likely missed deliberate design, John intended to convey. If we don't come familiar, the Feast of Tabernacles provides information, foundation, so that's what we'll talk about. That's what we'll get to. What is the Feast of Booths? And the reason, it'll become very obvious why the Feast of Booths is not super common knowledge, both by usins and even by our Jewish brethren. Direct references, etc., glean some details. It was in Jerusalem. Temple was located. Remember, you got to go. Major feast, likely crowded, up to 1 million people. We know that. We're going to find out about Jesus going in secret. The 8-day fast allowed Jesus to teach in the temple. There's more of this. We'll get into this. I don't have Edersheim's in here, but I'll talk about Edersheim. The last day of the feast, the great day, yes, of the feast. Explanation what this means. In other words, allusions, location, etc. This is just a setup talking about it. The Jewish feasts were both, this is a Christian, I was wrong, this is a Christian commentary about John specifically. And it says, activities, rituals during the feast remind the Israelites of significant historical events and often anticipated future events. The early scriptural injunctions concerning the Feast of Tabernacles, also known as Feast of Booths, indicate Israel could feast was to help them remember when the Lord brought them out of the land of Egypt. In Leviticus, for example, the children of Israel were commanded to construct and dwell in booths throughout the week of the feast to remind them of the years of wandering in the wilderness before the Lord brought them into the promised land. During one of the celebratory processions of the feast, those in the procession carried lulav. It's a plume of branches from a tree or bush. It's supposed to be 5 different things. I think it talks about this. Yeah, it does. Right hands, citron in the left. The lulav represents Israel's traveling through the various types of foliage in the journey through the wilderness, and the citron signified the fruit that God had promised to his people. Other aspects, we'll talk about this. This is really important. So you see, one of the reasons that most contemporary people don't know about it, and even in Jerusalem. Now, in Jerusalem, I don't know if anyone's been there during the Feast of Booths, whether they see people do it. But in this time period, every single person would build usually a lean-to on the top of their roof. And they would sleep there for 8 days. Read my book, Centurion, I talk about it. It's Ruth is staying on the roof. Why do they stay on the rooftops? Cool. Well, it's really cold in this time of year. It's basically in the winter time prior to Christmas, so around November, December period. So it's kind of cool. You don't need to be there for coolness. They're roughing it on the rooftop. But why would you stay on the rooftop and not in the streets?
It was filthy.
Protect yourself.
Filthy in the streets and safer in the rooftops. Because, remember, are there police? Who's the police? You're the police.
No sewers.
What's that?
No sewers.
Right, there are no sewers. You're right. And there's no aqueduct of fresh water until good old Pilate, illegally took the temple funds and built one. So anyway, yes. So best to stay up on the rooftops. And in the past, everybody had a flat rooftop. Well, that'll work in a modern building. You might be able to do that, right? But today, the average person is not in necessarily a flat rooftop in Jerusalem. So you're going to have a little problem. Plus, you got multi-stories right in your apartments.
Kids camp in the backyard.
It's
safe.
Yeah, it's hard to camp. Yeah, it's like camping in the backyard. But they would do it for 8 days in the festival. So one of the other aspects of the feast, the water drawing ceremony, the lighting of the enormous lampstands in the courts of the temple, in conjunction with the reading of the messianic passages in Zechariah, pointing to the future coming Messiah, discussed later in the paper. The timing of the feast held in the fall around the time when the yearly harvest or ingathering pointed both backward to the time when God gathered Israel out of Egypt and forward to the time of the final harvest when Israel's mission should be completed and all nations gather unto the Lord. Thus, Israelites who gathered in the temple in Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles were inundated with festivals and symbols and inspired thoughts, a variety of themes such as deliverance and the coming of the Messiah and the eventual gathering of all God's children to him. Let's see, so more to this.
The Jews have stopped reading those messianic passages. They don't read Isaiah 53 53. I mean, today.
Well, they'll read them, but the problem is that in Rambam, you can't ignore Rambam. Okay, Rambam, 14th century, he was not the Rabboni of Rabbonis, so that's Gamaliel. But Rambam is the guy who pretty much set in stone, so to speak, the Jewish idea of the Messiah, 1400. And he uses the stuff. Now, the ones they don't use are mostly the, what's the one? I want to say Isaiah.
It's Isaiah 53.
Isaiah. They don't like Isaiah. Why do they not like Isaiah?
It clearly talks about Jesus.
Well, it's the suffering Messiah, the big time suffering Messiah. Now, Ezekiel and Zechariah, they like because you have the Messiah that's coming, conquering. And so that's why Rambam, and this is Rambam, before Rambam, the Jewish people generally agreed that there was a singular Messiah. After Rambam, there's two. There's the priestly Messiah who dies and is supposedly resurrected, and maybe. And then you have the kingly Messiah who comes in and clears out the bad guys and brings back. Because remember, Pharisees, Sadducees don't believe in any resurrection. So everything's got to be now, right? It's got to be in the flesh. And the Pharisees believe in a physical resurrection. So with a physical resurrection, what do you got to have? A nation state, a place, a thing, right? For the resurrected. That's the historical future. So the Messiah by Rambam, and I used to I have the list, someplace, but Rambam's list is huge. Not huge, just as big as page worth, that have the characteristics of the Messiah and the way it's supposed to work. And he carries on from the scriptures from Zechariah, not so much Isaiah. They don't like Isaiah because, I think I got the right one. They don't like Isaiah because, the long one, because the suffering Messiah is not part of the idiom. The suffering Messiah and the sacrificial Messiah is right out. The Messiah dies, but he dies fighting, right? Even the priest dies fighting. Killed by his enemies, and then the king comes in and saves him. And you know why? Why did they separate why did Rambam separate the king from the priest? Remember coming out of Babylon? Out of Babylon, were there any boys going to Babylon that could make babies?
No.
No. So all the people coming out of Babylon that were supposed to be Jewish background, their Jewish background came from the mother. And that's one of the reasons, although the Israelites, the Jewish people have always counted their matriarchal parentage. So their identity as a Jewish person comes from the mother, always, not from the father. So if the fathers aren't Jewish, you ain't nothing else you can do. So coming out of Babylon, if your mother was Jewish, then you're Jewish, right? But there's no Y chromosome folks that have the thing. So you have a real problem with the kingship, right? Kingship had to come from the mother. That's a problem. How about the priesthood? Comes from Aaron. But if no boys are there, you got a problem. So, coming out of Babylon. So it's a matriarchal progression in their society. Rambam knew this. And even though, remember, one of the big things that what's his name did, I thought it was, it made it take 50 more years to rebuild Jerusalem. But he did what? What did he do? The first purge. Who was it? From the period when they came back from Babylon, was that Zechariah? Was it Zechariah and Ezekiel? Jeremiah. Nehemiah and Jeremiah, I think.
Oh, it's Nehemiah
And Ezra. Ezra and Nehemiah, yeah. Anyway, when they came back, what's the first purge?
divorce. Didn't you have to divorce your wife?
Yeah, if you couldn't make your maternal thing back, then you're done.
Kick her out the
Yep, send them back to Babylon, right? That's first thing, which is really funny because it didn't go through the daddy, it went to the mommy. So kicking the mommies back, if they weren't Jewish and meant the kids weren't Jewish. So that was the first purge. That caused a delay. And obviously God was not happy with that because remember, all the claims that we see, the Bible is a historical document. So many times you see claims about, they felt like they were supposed to do this, but then what did it do? It took another 50 years to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem because they did it, right? So you see punishments. And, it's historical. So God's like saying, what? I didn't tell you to kick them back up to the curb because they're not maybe as Jewish as you are. What? They did the same thing to the Samaritans. The Samaritans were all Jewish. All of them were Jewish. They're more Jewish than any of the Babylonian captives coming back. But what did they do? Kicked them out too. And matter of fact, when they went to Nehemiah and said, "Hey, Nehemiah, we want to help," or Ezekiel, or Ezra, "we want to help build Jerusalem." What they say? No. Talk to the hand. Ain't listening, right?
Then they put up a steel fab temple.
Yeah, it took them 50 years to put up a steel fab temple because they irritated the people so much that now they're infighting, right? They're having fights. So this is not a positive situation. But where were we going with this? Anyway, the big deal is Rambam said there were people that claimed to be in the priesthood, right? The problem is, what did Herod the Great do to all the records? He destroyed all the temple records, so no one could know, even from the Babylonian exercise. Plus, there's a good reason why they wanted to destroy them. Like I said, the Samaritans were all the peasants from Israel and had a greater claim. So you want to get rid of that, right? And Herod was an Edomite. So there's no way he wants to keep that around because he wants to keep the kingship, right? So they had no idea who are priests and who are kings. You might be able to do DNA today to figure it out. But you and I could be, in the lineage of Aaron as much as a lot of Jewish people could be. And I also mentioned this, what's the most popular Jewish name in the world? Cohen, because it means priest. Because you would sure like to be part of that group, right? Because that's a special group. And that's a rabbinical group, by the way. Even today, if you're a Pharisee, well, they don't call them Pharisees, but, if you're a rabbi, if you're a Cohen, oh, man, you got check marks, like the military check marks, Are you trained? Anyway, so there are very interesting dynamics. These are all historical, cultural dynamics. We got the same problem going. If you want to start the kingship, next Frederikian kingship, if you're a German or Anglo-Saxon or whatever your background is, you're going to have a real hard time supporting that in the modern era. Just saying. So, Feast of Tabernacles, where we are. Major aspects, dwelling in booths for the, or Sukkot, they're called Sukkot. The lighting of the lampstands, the court of women, the additional sacrifices and offerings for the week, the drawing of water from the pool of Shalom, and pouring on the altar of the temple. Each of these deliberately designed to stir deep religious reactions. Yeah. It's a beautiful ceremony, beautiful stuff. Feast of Tabernacles, 8 days during the Shabbat, ending with the next Shabbat. Also known as the Festival of Booths, Sukkot, because of the temporary booths they set up. They lived in during the week-long festival. Moses instructed children of Israel through their generations to make booths of the boughs of the goodly branches of palms, the fig trees, willows of the brook. They were to dwell in these booths. There's five different things. I don't know if I list them here. Dwellers of temporary booths might have pondered their continual dependence on the Lord God, etc., deliverance, recollected. I think that's why I put this in here. I got this as a paper from the thing. Days of the sovereignty, dwelling in the booths during the Feast of Tabernacles, may have thought the freedom gathered during the Lord. Let's see, more and more prayers. And then, deliverance from Roman subjugation. The Romans were actually providing them a lot. So subjugation is a funny word. Following the evening sacrifice, first day of the tabernacles, the gates of the temple were left open so the public could gather in the court of women. participate in the lighting of the 4 giant lampstands, 75 feet high. Remember, if you are not Jewish, the court of women, right? What's outside of the court of women? The court of Gentiles. So if you're a Gentile, this is one of the big deals. Remember, they claimed or they made the accusation that Paul brought Gentiles into the temple, which means he brought them into the court of women or into the men's court. So I could draw the picture. I think you've seen it before. Each lampstand had 4 golden bowls filled with oil. The priest climbed the ladders to each bowl and lit the wicks made from the worn-out clothing of the priest collected through the year. The light from the lampstands was so bright, it said it would light up every courtyard in Jerusalem. The line ceremony was accompanied with music, singing, dancing. It lasted well into the night. This is, I think, from Edersheim. Early morning hours, unclear whether the ritual was performed anew every day or whether the lamps were kept lit through the week of the festival. Most participants of the Feast of Towns will never see the sacred lampstand or menorah found in the holy place. Remember, how big is the menorah? It's gold. It's 60 pounds of gold, which if you add it up, it's going to be about 8 inches high. And it's not meant for lighting of any or illumination. It's meant for lighting the sacrifice. That's the big deal.
So what were these lampstands they were talking about? Were they outside?
Yeah, they had them outside. We only know them from records, the records we have, and this is where this information is coming from, Josephus and others, about the large lampstands that were used because,
75 feet high.
yeah, big. Well, and this is where we also get that, we get the idea, and I've showed you pictures, right? Even the contemporary view, if you look back at the Mishnah, the Talmudic documents, you'll see they talk about the height of the lampstands being about 5 feet, which means they had to be made of bronze. Because when you calculate the height versus the weight, you get about 60 pounds of bronze to make about a 5-foot tall lampstand. So what's interesting is, science matters. And so if you're going to do science, you better do science. So figure out the weight and density of your material and then calculate it. They might have gilded the bronze with gold, which is not an uncommon thing, but you're not going to have a pure gold whatever. And also, I'll just remind you, we think that lamps are for illumination. The word for lamp in Hebrew does not mean to illuminate anything. It means to light something. So why did you keep a lamp in Hebrew in early ancient world? In the early ancient world, is to keep the flame going. Yeah, because all right, homework. Go home, take a stick, try to make a fire. Okay. After you do it, you can rub 2 sticks together. If you ever tried that, it is the most painful thing ever. You can do it. You can achieve it. Once you do it, what do you want to never do again? That is, you never want to do that ever again. That is exactly right. That's why, by the way, per the flames from Zeus, right? What would you rather do? A little lightning strike? Oh, look, here's some fire. Or even better, Apollo's fire, right? Take the back of a shield. That's where they light the Olympian flame. Woo-hoo-hoo. But still going to the temple. Hey, priest, I need a flame for my house. Oh yeah, here, light it, right? Anyway, would never see the sacred lampstand, gold lampstand, still place. Yeah, inside. 4 impressive lampstands stirred the participants to reflect on God's presence. Throughout the feast, additional sacrifices are offered. During the Passover, other major, twice the number of rams and lambs. Okay, and here we are, Edersheim. Yeah. Okay, so remember, 6 times a year you get to eat meat. Yeah. And look, where do you want to be? You want to be in Jerusalem. What do you get? Twice the number of rams and lambs and 5 times the number of bullocks. Man, you're eating steak. You're eating lamb chops and steak for 8 days straight. And guess what? That's the Thanksgiving sacrifice. And everybody's getting it. Edersheim points out number of each sacrifice: 70 bullocks, 14 lambs, 98 lambs. I don't know if that would go far enough for 1 million people, but maybe, I don't know. And everybody's bringing their own, right? You're bringing this, you're bringing your own. Number 7, okay, completion. Jesus Day forgot the true purpose of being the sacrifice. Yeah, this is their comment. Sacrifice of Mosaic law serves several purposes. Remember, and I could draw the thing. Whatever. This is not untrue. The great and last sacrifice accomplished the infinite atonement, which is what we're talking about. That's what Jesus was talking. And Alma, that's one of the Mishnah documents. Fortunately, then the Feast of Tabernacles was the drawing of water from Shiloh and the libation on the altar. Said he had not seen the joy of the drawing of the water. The Feast of Tabernacles does not know what joy is. The parade-like ritual in this ceremony, the most notable. Okay, so this is a big deal. The Pool of Shiloh. Pool of Shiloh is the one where it's down in the southern part of Jerusalem. It was Hezekiah's pool. Hezekiah had it dug out. And the problem with it, it had very similar problems to the other pool. The other pool is the pool that we studied, the pool of, the one that's in the north area. Those are both pools are used for the mikvah, the mikvah. But the one that, remember where Jesus healed the guy? That's the one on the north. The one that we're talking about is the one in the south, Hezekiah's pool. The problem with Hezekiah's pool is originally it was living water. The water was always bubbling. But what had happened, and even today we know it gradually got blocked. And so it was not being refilled today. And I don't know if they've undone the blockage, but they've studied up the pool and found the blockage in it. But in Jesus' time, it was a still pool. And, this is another pool where if you saw motion on the water, right, that meant the presence of God. Well, they would go to the pool of Shiloh and they would fill a ewer and they would go all the way back up from Hezekiah's pool back to the temple, and they would pour the water onto the altar. It was part of the altar. The altar was supposed to have been cleansed. And this was the cleansing of the living water on the pool, on the altar. Let's see. Most notable and popular during the preparation morning burnt sacrifice, procession of priests with the accompaniment of singing and flute playing went the way from the temple down to the pool of Siloam, where priests filled a golden flask with water while a choir repeated Isaiah with joy. Okay, the priests returned to the temple via the water gate on the south side of the wall, immediately surrounding the temple within the court of the Gentiles. Procession was joined by other pilgrims who come to the temple. By the way, this is when they carried their lulab. They would carry their things, their palm branches and branches to the temple together. And then the ram's horn, you had to hear the blast of the ram's horn. This was a critical thing. If you didn't hear this was a sin in Judaism. They moved from the altar of sacrifice. Court of priests immediately surrounded the temple. The priests carrying the golden flask filled water ascended the altar, prepared to pour the libation. Actually, as Edersheim says, he didn't do that. He would pour it on the side of the altar at the base, not on the top of the altar, but that's their impression. The procession would carry the lulabs and the centrons. It was the 5 different things. They all circled the altar. The priests had charge of pouring water off the water libation. Their ceremony is accompanied by great rejoicing, etc. And the pilgrims, they circled the altar 7 times instead of just once on the last day. It was performed at the sacrifice of several aspects, spiritual riches. The pool of Shalom received its Shiloh, the water from the Gihon spring, a natural water source. The Shalom living water, a water suitable for ritual purification. The concept of living water is critical in understanding the significance. Living water, because Christ said, I am the living water, right? The pure natural sources, based on recent archaeological push, that it was likely a mikvah, ancient ritual bath, etc. The water from Shiloh symbolized the significance for Lord God. The water from Gihon was channeled to Shiloh via Hezekiah's tunnel. which had been dug to preserve the people of Jerusalem during the Assyrian siege days of Hezekiah. His day was not like the same pool as the one Hezekiah. The site was still reminded those of the deliverance, etc. The water pouring ritual was accompanied by a prayer of gratitude for the rains that had brought forth. It basically was originally a rain or a water ceremony in the ancient Jewish people. Okay, Shabbat day. The water drawing ceremony is not performed by a prayer for rain, so offered sacrifice, thus reflected participants, etc. The most important thing, and I don't know if I have this is Gardner. I don't know if I have other stuff here about this, but I'll just mention a couple of things that are very important. Got a couple of minutes. Well, number one, according to Josephus, one of the times the priest either intentionally or unintentionally missed pouring it on the altar, which, depending on the source you read, they either tore him apart and killed him or they beat him to death. We don't know, but it was considered, and the reason the priests may have done it is because we don't know. This was an earlier period, but one of the most important aspects of this is right after this ceremony, after they circle the altar, the high priest stands in the court of Gentiles, or maybe the court of men. Anyway, he stands where the people could see him, and he recites the 118th Psalm. What does it say at the end of the 118th Psalm? Blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh. Now, when he said this, he would say, by this time, in Christ's time, blessed is he who comes in the name of. He would never pronounce the name aloud. It's the only time the name Jehovah was pronounced. And in this time we know he would whisper it. So the common people would not hear how the name of God was pronounced. Now, what was supposed to happen is when he said this, he was supposed to wait. What was he waiting for? The Messiah to announce himself. That's what Edersheim writes from his research in the Mishnah documents and also from historical documents and Josephus. So when the priest said the 118th Psalm, he said, blessed are you who comes in the name of Yahweh. And they were waiting. We're going to see, I believe it's in John, because Jesus stands up and says, he who desires living water, come to me, and I will give him to drink. And we're going to see that eventually. That's in a later thing when we get to it. That also happened at the Festival of Booths. In this case, we get a precursor to the Festival of Booths, but Jesus is not there. He's there secretly, privately. And we're going to see that. We're going to see how that plays out. The reason I went through this is I want you to know about the Festival of Booths, since we don't do it at Christmas time or, in the time of year when we're supposed to do it. And we don't do any of these really cool Jewish festivals. And the Jewish people generally don't either. How many of you see your neighbors, Jewish neighbors with booths set up during that period right outside their houses? It's just not done today, which is really sad. But this is one of the pilgrim feasts. Well, why don't they do it? Because you can't do a pilgrim feast. You can't go to the temple and sacrifice to eat teruma, which is the whole purpose. Well, the purpose itself is worshiping God, but the teruma is a great thing. So you get to have beef and lamb chops and meat. Of course, we eat it every day, so we don't worry so much about it. But yeah, in the ancient world, 6 times a year, you're going, baby. I'm going because this is going to Chester's Chop House. My one time that I get some real protein. Anyway, so we've got it laid out. This is a picture. We're going to see more of this. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look at us this week. In your name we pray. Amen.